excuse me. Then again, if he does have a serious injury that's a lat and it's partially torn or something, you don't want him tearing his lat now at 25, that surgery, when he could just rest for a month or two.
Yeah, well, I mean, if it's that, then I wish they would just simply tell us and then handle it accordingly, for sure.
Yeah,
I'd
like to know, of course. I think that's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
Are they like that? I don't know the injuries too well with the Yankees.
What was the question? You kind of cut out a little bit.
How are the Yankees with the injuries? Do they tell you how it is? Like the Mets, they tell everybody because they just fuck it up all the time. So, but I don't know the Yankees.
I mean, the Yankees, for the most part, I mean, they're pretty honest. I think the one thing that was kind of perplexing to me was the fact that with Jordan Montgomery, they kind of prolonged it. I think there was something wrong with him. I understand they wanted to do the PRP, the plasma-rich injection to try to get him back. But just like what happened with, Tanaka, although he's been lucky thus far, there's certain guys that if it's torn, it's torn. But I think, you look at some guys who have come back from the PRP injection and been fully healthy. There's only been one guy, and that was Garrett Richards, and that was with the Angels. And now he's a guy who is actually going through testing right now with scientists and others about why he was able to go from basically a torn UCL. He did the PRP injections, and now he's been, I guess, fully healed. And they have no idea why, and now he's the guinea pig. So I thought that was kind of interesting when I heard that.
I've seen other reports where it depends on where the tear in the UCL is. If it's towards the middle of the UCL, that's the worst case. That's automatic Tommy John. If it's towards one of the the edges of it, then suddenly there's options. And I think they're even working on more stuff that hasn't been done yet. But there's other treatment options in the near future that will possibly be looked at. And maybe that's kind of where Richards falls under. So it would certainly be nice for them to figure this stuff out, because, I mean, that's a nightmare, especially if it happens mid-season, because then you've definitely lost him for the rest of this one and probably all of the next season. If it happens in spring training or April, well, at least there's hope that you might have them post All-Star break, the second half. So it's all about timing. And with Montgomery specifically, it's hardly ever good when they get shut down for that stuff. How many guys really come out of it with just rest? They tried it with Cliff Lee at the end of his career. He couldn't do it. And it just seems like Tommy John, I don't know, at least 80% of the time is what actually happens.
I mean, the prime example, too, is the pitching prospect that the Yankees had before they traded him away for Sonny Gray. James Caprillion. They tried to get him to rehab, do the PRP and everything. He went 2 innings and then tore it. So, I mean, even after all the rest. And what's surprisingly enough about that is he had the surgery and he got traded to Oakland along with Dustin Fowler and Jorge Mateo. And everyone likes to bash the trade that the Yankees made, giving up those 3 prospects. 2 of them were basically blocked, and the third one they couldn't even rely on. And ever since they've been traded, I get Dustin Fowler, has been great for them, and I think he's going to have a bright career for the Oakland Athletics. But Jorge Mateo was batting below 200 in AAA. I get it's AAA, he's a young kid, but still, for all the expectations, he's batting below 200, only has a couple extra base hits. And Caprillion hasn't even been throwing off a mound yet, and I heard he had to get another PRP injection on his elbow. So is he ever going to pitch again? That's, I think, the bigger question than anything.
Yeah, true. And remember Nathan Eovaldi a couple seasons ago?
Yes.
Weirdest.
Don't even get me started about him.
Yeah, I mean, he comes out, pitches a scoreless 1, 2, 3 inning. I think most of them were flyouts, and then he exits the game. So I'm like, oh, okay. And then the next day, he's got a torn flexor tendon, a torn UCL, and I'm like, what the hell was he doing in that game? How could they not have been concerned? Yeah. So
I mean, just look at his delivery, the amount of fastballs that he threw. You knew it was going to happen. He wasn't a pitcher. He was a guy who was given, a God-given arm throwing 99 to 100. and he just never tried to be an actual pitcher. He was one of those guys that was a dead brain heaving thrower that's like, oh, I'm just going to throw it through a brick wall and just see how many outs I can get. Just like the year when he won, I think it was like 14 games, maybe 13, something like that. And everybody was like, oh, he's the future. I'm like, no, he's not. He's getting 9 runs a game. I could win those games.
Yeah.
For crying out loud. Like, he's not a pitcher. He's a freaking thrower. That's all he is.
Yeah, we've had similar problems with Joe Kelly in the past where he's just too fastball happy and there isn't a lot of movement.
He overthrows it, and it's just always wide left. Then Vasquez goes out there, taps his arm. You're overthrowing. Yep, I got it. Wide left.
Or he shot puts the changeup 50 foot in front of home plate.
Oh my God, yeah, he bounces it.
Well, let me ask you this, Chris. I don't know if I did previously, but it's an interesting enough question. If you could go back, I guess you would have to go back to last season. Would you nix the future Stanton deal and just go all in on Verlander before the August 31st deadline?
To be honest with you, knowing now what Verlander is, 10 times out of 10, 20 out of 20, 100%, the Yankees at Verlander, they win. They win the World Series. They beat Houston. And honestly, I don't even think Houston gets by you guys, to be real with you. But I think looking at the fact that people did not know what Verlander was, because I think the Astros are so far ahead schematically with the analytics and doing whatever they're doing, which I've read a little bit about, but I think there's more to it that people don't know about. I think if the Yankees got Verlander, I don't know if he's the same guy. I really believe that the Astros are so far ahead of everybody that they could have gotten any pitcher, maybe not like Verlander, and they would have gotten as far. I think that was the bonus. But the fact that they've been able to turn around guys like Charlie Morton, who was a journeyman pitcher, and all of a sudden is now an ace. Keuchel was dominant for a couple years. I know he's been but that's just because his velocity is down. But Garrett Cole, who showed spurts with Pittsburgh, is now turning into that ace is what they thought. And Verlander's been Verlander. And then McCullers is, I think McCullers is going to get hurt eventually because it always happens. But to answer your question, do I think the Verlander trade would have really made a difference? Yes, but then again, the Houston Astros are so far ahead of everybody.
That's an excellent point because, I've looked at those individually, but I've never linked them together like you just did. And I agree that Houston knows something. They know something that nobody else does, and I think it's legit. I just think it's just a groundbreaking type of thing, with pitching analytics. And Trevor Bauer came out with that conspiracy, and I love Trevor Bauer, and I still do. But
he's trying to stir stuff up.
Yeah, and that he's the type that loves to do it. So I just,
yeah,
for what it is, I just thought it was funny. But I think they're doing something legitimately, and the rest of the league needs to figure it out and get there, because they're gonna probably develop young pitching that's gonna be just as good, if not better, than everybody else's, and it's just crazy. So that is an excellent point, and my life would be over if you guys got Verlander, because I say it all the time, he's my favorite non-Red Sox player. I love the guy. No guy could walk into a big market, whether it's the trickiness of Boston or New York, and just own it like he does. So
yeah, he crushes it, and Houston's definitely doing something right. The Cardinals had a guy go to federal prison for 2 years because of how good they're doing it. When they were losing 100 games because they're stealing their analytics and stealing their scouting, and they're doing it. And on top of that, they do a very smart thing where they're not drafting pitching. They are going out and acquiring pitching between trades and free agency, and having their pitching coaches and their analytics sit down with these guys and bring the best out of them. If you watch some of the interviews during, the Red Sox in the Houston series, they're talking about how they have, they come in and they make their pitchers pitch what they really do well, and they excel in that. And that's something that's very simply said, but Houston's doing it so well Where if you got a guy that throws a great curveball like Drew Pomeranz, they're going to make that curveball even better to the point where his other pitches look better because of it.
And I'm glad that you mentioned that about the pitchers, because if you notice the teams that have really gone far in the playoffs or have really made their mark, it's been the teams that have, what have they done in the draft? They've drafted batters, hitters, and they've gone out and acquired pitching. If you notice the guys who have really been dominant the last 4 to 5 years on the pitching side, take away Clayton Kershaw and Madison Bumgarner, because they're kind of like the outliers here. You look at guys like Jake Arrieta. He was god-awful with the Orioles. He was dominant and a perennial Hall of Famer for the Cubs for a 3-year stretch, and now he's doing his thing with the Phillies. You talk about other guys like Corey Kluber, who was a throw-in for Jake Westbrook. Talk about that name. Jake Westbrook, who used to be on the Yankees and the Indians, that sinker baller. Yep. You know, he was acquired for Kluber. There's so many guys that you can turn around and just say, this guy, that guy. Max Scherzer, for prime example. He was a bust with the D-backs. He goes to Detroit and is good, but the Nationals, he was dominant. Yep. So pitching you can acquire and be able to get. It's a lot harder to develop bats because they're just not on the market.
No, it's hard, and bad teams draft pitchers. Good teams draft hitters, and you could even throw Bumgarner and the Dodgers in the mix because when they drafted them, they sucked. The Dodgers sucked when they drafted Kershaw. They took years to develop them, and then everything came about, and the Giants weren't good until 2010.
I think
they had their years, of course, obviously up and down. They weren't base leaders, but they weren't. The Dodgers now in the past 5 years have been every single year competing for, the World Series. But when Kershaw was drafted, they were not competing for a World Series.
Those are all excellent points, and I tweeted something similarly the other day where I was hoping the Red Sox wouldn't take a pitcher high for many of those reasons. It's just too finicky. I mean, remember that Brady Aiken guy, Brady Aiken? The Astros drafted him. I guess there was some elbow issues or whatever, and I forget how it all went down, but he had the surgery, and he just hasn't been healthy. And there's a couple other high picks in the first round that just haven't worked out either. So I would take a bat every time, at least in the first round.
Yeah, it just makes sense to take a bat, and that an injury thing isn't going to be huge with that. It's not like a UCL, tendon and everything like that. And if a guy can hit, he can just flat out hit. And pitching's different because the competition gets better, but you can hit at all levels. And it's just something about hitters, man. They just mash and they just know it. They just feed off of it.
Right.
A guy like Schwarber, or a guy like Benintendi, a guy like even Buster Posey, a guy like Trout, hitting all up, Harper, hitting at all levels and excelling in it compared to pitching. And pitchers, you're like, hey, he got like a 3.5 ERA, but in this league at this time, he was really good. He's got potential. Hitters are just straight up hitters. They're savages. It's great.
Yeah, and I mean, and look at Mookie. He was a 4th or 5th round pick.
Yeah, he was an infielder.
Yeah, and an infielder.
He was a second baseman.
Yeah.
Yeah, he got converted because of Dustin Pedroia.
Yeah.
And every now and then, I know I've brought it up, maybe he needs to come back to second base, because we got literally nothing, to plug in there besides utility guys. So I wouldn't necessarily do that now, but it's just a scenario constantly in the back of my mind.
I mean, you could, say next year you wanted to put Mookie at second, and you wanted JD in right, and you wanted Benintendi in left and JBJ in center. You could do that.
Yeah.
Or you could over even more and put JBJ in center, Benintendi in right, or Benintendi, that, and have JD in left. You could do it.
Yeah, the only concern at this point is, especially lately, is I think his risk of injuries rises quite a bit.
Yeah, he plays the ball. He plays the game hard, so he'd be diving around everywhere and stuff like that. That's true.
Right. All right, let's. I guess we can just talk Red Sox catching. I don't know if we'll get to a lot of it. Well, actually, you know what? David, why don't you take us through the